A year after making Falling from the High Rise of Love, I'd been working in Barcelona with a company, a really great company called Senza Tempo, which means without time. And I'd met, as part of their working process, a beautiful Spanish performer called Manel Trias, who I fell in love with instantly and asked him if he wouldn't mind coming to England to create a duet with TC, who by this time we'd sort of made an unsaid commitment to carry on working together. And so Manel came over, and I think in a very short period, maybe 2 weeks, we made a new live duet that was part of a video installation work that then toured the country, called On the House. On the House is the first and only video and sound installation with live performance that I've made with the company. And that's partly in response. Manel is also a designer and a maker, as well as a performer in Spain. And I was interested in continuing the relationship with TC. So we made this work over 2 weeks in Sheffield. I wanted to make an antidote to the urban despair of falling, and one way in which I wanted to do that was to place the glasshouse again in a sort of rustic situation, but inside now. The glasshouse from the film Glasshouse that was on the moors, I brought back into the studio and surrounded it with leaves. And I suppose On the House was an attempt to place a live duet against video material of the same performers to see how that play between the screen dance and the live dance took what happened between that interplay. And also we performed it in the round, really, so it was the first time that I'd explored an audience not sitting on conventional seating but being right in amongst the action. Placing the glasshouse in the middle of a performance space, surrounded by leaves to indicate a wider performance area, with 2 screens, one on the floor, one on the wall, of pre-recorded material, allowed an audience to get very close to the dance, but also made the performers have to negotiate the people in the audience. So they were not only having to live dance a quite complicated duet, but also negotiate people getting really close to the action, which was very thrilling, actually. When we were making On the House, we had to think about how to structure and choreograph movement that wouldn't knock audiences over or that the performers wouldn't trip over the audiences. So it was quite interesting. The stuff in the house obviously was safe, but the stuff around the house, we had to negotiate the audience and they had to negotiate the performers, which on the outside I really enjoyed watching. There were shifts in the audience, they would move around and watch from different perspectives. Some people would lie down, look under the house. Some very young children came to see this and they would go right up to the action while TC was trying to dance and sort of get in the way, so Manel and TC had to negotiate that too. That's really quite thrilling for the audience, I think, to get that close to the action of dance and performance, and quite difficult and challenging, but also thrilling, I think, for the performers to negotiate that contact, whether it's through proximity or actual touch. There were a couple of occasions where younger members of the audience, because this was open to all ages, because it was quite playful duet, would come right up to the windows. And so again, we were looking a little bit like in Falling. What's the relationship between the performers and the audience? Do we acknowledge that they're there, or do we keep going with the material? And I think because Manel and TC are both playful performers, they would clock them but not let themselves be interrupted. So something about how does the fiction of the dance continue, or the establishing of that performative relationship continue when you've got real people getting in the way and getting really close. And I think it was kind of a loose relationship. I don't think we tried too hard to acknowledge the audience, and we didn't ignore them either. So it's something about, which again TC and Manel are brilliant at this, just remaining open as a performer to the influences around you and the response, but not letting it knock you off course. So I think each performance space we went into shifted this show, and each audience shifted the work because there were a different set of negotiations to accommodate. I suppose in On the House we were crossing the disciplines of sort of live art. We toured the work in a gallery situation more than a theatre situation, so we were testing out what it means to put dance in an art gallery context rather than a dark theatre space. So a lot of the spaces that we went to were white spaces rather than black spaces, which altered the work and allowed us to project, obviously, the video works. We were also combining, again, a pre-written soundtrack, original music by John Avery again. Manel isn't really a dancer, so we were looking at performance and TC as a dancer and how a performer rubs up against a dancer, although I would argue that TC's a performer rather than just a dancer. But in terms of form, we were looking at what language evolves from two people that come from different disciplines, and then what happens when that live work is set against a pre-made film that's also shown at the same time. We had elements of aerial work in the house again, hanging upside down, sitting on the roof, falling off, being caught, jumping through windows. So in a way it was much more physical, athletic use of the glasshouse than Richard and I had used for our film, partly because the performers were more physical than Richard and I are. Much lighter piece of work. I was interested, and I've done this again since, I was interested in using the same set for a very different feeling, a different atmosphere, a different kind of lightness, playful duet rather than the rather dark duet that Richard and I made. I've since done that with, much later, with If We Go On and Motherland, where it's actually the same set but reversed. So that's a bit of a theme, how to recycle the sets to offer a new context, a different context, is quite an interesting thing to me. I think what we took forward from On the House was a keen interest in the relationship with the audience, which you couldn't avoid in this work. But also later, we used the glasshouse again several years later with TC again for a digital installation, just to shoot the material for that. We didn't use the structure again because I think we'd had enough of it by then, but it gave us ideas about installation work which we've since explored further in a more technical way. So it's true to say that each piece offers a new beginning that you might not then come to until 3 or 4 years later, but you store that there's something really interesting about placing our work in art galleries, or placing our work out of theatres, or placing our work in the round. And actually one of the performances of Underworld in 2015 will be, hopefully, in the round, which will alter it irrevocably.